Hi guys, welcome back. In this lesson we're going to start compositing our project. We're going to take the first step, which is going to be reconstructing the beauty image that came out of V-Ray for our robot. We're going to be looking at different techniques for that. We're going to go over additive, advanced additive, subtractive, and finally light selects, light contributions. After going over all these techniques, I will show you guys the one that I use in a regular compositing production, the reasons why, and how I use that to my advantage to make the image look better. Let's start with additive. Additive technique using V-Ray render passes. It's pretty straightforward. It's taking all the basic render passes and just plussing them or adding them together. There's really no correct order in layering these elements, but what I'm showing you guys here is the order in which I like to layer them just for consistency in different projects. So we're going to start with our two light passes, which is lighting and then GI. Then we're going to be adding the reflection, then the refraction, specular, subsurface scattering, and finally our self-illumination. Let's go to After Effects and let's do this. Let's take our paint effects from the last class and delete them. Let's move this here. Let's take this pre-comp and we don't need it. Okay. So, like we talked about in our last class, organization is important. So let's rename this DT underscore robot underscore build comp. Build comp is what I use to name all the comps in which I'm doing reconstructions of the beauty and whatnot. So let's do the same with this one, DT environment, build comp. Okay, let's go into the robot. Let's take a snapshot of this so we can compare that later. Let's make it a guide layer so we don't have it showing up when we start nesting this project. Let's move this to here. Okay, so our first pass in this slide that I show you is going to be lighting and then followed by the GI. Let's start with that. Lighting. Where's the lighting? Lighting's right here. Now, it's very important for me to mention that lighting, you can think of that as your main light, your key light in the scene, and it's also going to have the shadows baked in them from V-Ray. There's a way to tweak these shadows, and which I'm going to show you later in the lesson. Let's add the next pass, the GI. GI is good to think of the GI as your bounce light, your fill light. When you're adding them together, you have about 95%, 99% of the light contribution on the scene. The other 5 or 1% being the self-illumination passes or elements that emit light using luminance channels and whatnot. So let's add the next one in our slide, which is reflection, then followed by refraction. Let's add reflection, then followed by refraction. If we compare this with the snapshot, we can see that we're getting really close to the image. Let's add the subsurface. If we compare this, we're missing only one pass, and that's going to be the self-illumination. Where is the self-illumination? It's going to be right here. Now, set this to add, and what I like to do in almost every composite is to take that same RGBA image, set it to the top, and set it to stencil alpha, and call this alpha. So we're using this as a cookie cutter to cut everything below so we don't have any problems with edges and whatnot. The other thing that's very important is to start pre-compositing all these elements, and let's call it lighting. Let's call it actually robot lighting. Let's call this robot GI. This robot reflect. Oops. Let's call this robot refract. Now the shortcut for pre-composing elements is going to be Command Shift C on a Mac, which I think it's a Control Shift C on a PC. So this is going to be robot underscore SSS, and finally robot underscore SI for self-illumination, and let's call this robot underscore alpha. And we can use this as we need in different stages of our composite. So let's look at the shadows and what we can do about it. For shadows, I use this path called matte shadow from V-Ray, which is actually used along with an adjustment layer as a luma matte. Let's go here and set this to a luma matte. Let's go pre-compose this and call it pre-compose robot underscore matte shadow. Okay, and let's call this shadow. Okay, so by using this as an alpha, actually a luma matte, and adding at levels, you will start seeing the shadow being affected by this, and that's how I usually lift shadows. The other item that I want to go over is, let me switch to a white background, show you this. If we compare this with the snapshot that we took, you are going to start seeing edging problems. Now, the alpha took care of most of them. If I turn this off, you can see that it took care of a lot of them, but it's not quite gone. The reason for that is that there's something called pre-multiplication and unpremultiplication, something that Nuke handles very well, but After Effects mostly handles what we call pre-multiplication. Let me go to interpret footage, actually. Pre-multiplication is when After Effects is guessing what kind of alpha it has, and if it's pre-multiplied, it takes the alpha and multiplies it by the RGB image. Unpremultiplying is actually, let's switch back to a black background so we can see it more clear. It's taking this alpha and taking these gray values and making them solid white. So we're pre-multiplying, which is taking the alpha, actually dividing, doing the opposite of what happened the first time when we pre-multiplied. Instead of multiplying the image, we're unpremultiplying and we're removing it so we can actually see the raw alpha. Let's go actually shift channels. Let's go to full on, and then you guys will be able to see what I'm talking about. By doing full on, we're actually mimicking what in Nuke is called unpremultiplication. We're removing all these gray pixels and making the alpha solid white. Now, if we switch back to our white background and compare that to the snapshot that we took, you can see that the edging problems went away for the most part. Now, what the difference that you're seeing is from the shadow here. Oh, sorry. Let's take a snapshot of this guide layer again and compare that. You see, it's gone. Now, this happens because we're compositing images that came with an alpha embedded on them. So when we start layering them together, we start having these problems with the alpha. So it's a good practice to take these shift channels and paste it on these images. Now, what that's going to do is going to keep the alpha intact when we start adding all these levels and color corrections and heavy effects into these, which are going to be pushing the image really far. By doing so, we're not going to destruct the alpha, and we're going to keep our edges clean and free of any weird problems like we were having before. Okay, so that was a look at the additive approach for compositing our V-Ray images. In the next few lessons, we're going to be going over the other techniques.